Even today, his name sends chills across the world. One man born in a small Austrian town would rise to command an entire nation. He was a failed artist, a soldier, a voice that stirred fear and devotion alike. And in his hands, words became power, power became war, and war became unimaginable horror.
In the 20th century, humanity witnessed one of the darkest chapters in its history. A conflict so vast and destructive that it reshaped the world forever. Cities burned, nations collapsed, and entire populations were displaced as war spread across continents. By the time the fighting finally ended, more than 60 million people were dead, making it the deadliest conflict humanity had ever known. At the center of this catastrophe stood one man, a man whose name still sends a chill through history. More than 70 years after his death, the shadow of Adolf Hitler continues to stretch across the modern world. To millions of followers, he appeared to be a savior, a leader who promised strength, unity, and the restoration of national pride. In a time of economic collapse and political chaos, his words gave people something they desperately wanted to believe in: hope, certainty, and someone to blame. But history remembers him very differently. A failed artist searching for recognition, a soldier hardened by the trenches of the First World War, and eventually a master manipulator who learned how fear, anger, and resentment could be turned into political power. Through propaganda, intimidation, and ruthless ambition, he rose to dominate an entire nation. Democracy collapsed, opposition disappeared, and hatred was transformed into state policy. The result was the most devastating conflict in human history.
Adolf Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889, in the quiet border town of Braunau am Inn in Austria. It was a small settlement along the frontier with Germany, far removed from the centers of power that would one day shape his life. Few could have imagined that a child born in this quiet town would later change the course of world history. His father, Alois Hitler, was a strict customs official who believed strongly in discipline and authority. He expected obedience from his children and hoped his son would follow a stable government career. But young Adolf resisted his father's plans and struggled to find direction in school. In contrast, his mother, Clara Hitler, was gentle and deeply devoted to him. She encouraged his interests and protected him from the harshness of his father's temper. As a boy, Adolf dreamed not of politics or power, but of becoming an artist. He spent hours sketching buildings and landscapes, convinced that his future belonged in art. In 1914, Europe was plunged into a conflict that would soon engulf the continent. What began as a regional crisis quickly expanded into the devastating struggle known as World War I. When the war began, Adolf Hitler, then living in Munich, volunteered to serve in the German army. He served on the Western Front as a dispatch runner, carrying messages between command posts under constant enemy fire. For 4 years, he lived surrounded by mud, explosions, and the chaos of trench warfare. During the war, Hitler was wounded and temporarily blinded by a gas attack. For his service, he was awarded the Iron Cross. But in 1918, Germany surrendered. The defeat shocked many soldiers returning from the front. Hitler refused to accept that Germany had truly been defeated. Instead, he embraced the belief that the nation had been betrayed from within. This idea would later become a powerful source of anger and motivation in his political life. After World War I, Germany faced humiliation on every level. The Treaty of Versailles imposed harsh reparations, crushing the economy and leaving millions struggling to survive. By 1923, hyperinflation had reached unprecedented levels. People carried wheelbarrows full of worthless banknotes just to buy bread. Savings evaporated, Pensions disappeared and despair spread across the nation. In this chaos, Adolf Hitler found an opportunity. He joined a small fringe political group known as the Nazi Party. It was here that he discovered his most dangerous weapon, his voice. His speeches were incendiary, filled with anger and certainty, offering simple answers to the complex pain of a defeated nation. He blamed the Jews, he blamed the communists, he blamed the weak, and he promised Germany a return to greatness. In 1923, Hitler attempted a coup, the Beer Hall Putsch, trying to seize power in Munich. The effort failed, and he was arrested and imprisoned. But prison gave him time to reflect and to write Mein Kampf. The Great Depression devastated Germany. Factories closed, businesses failed, and unemployment soared past 6 million. Amid this chaos, the Nazi Party promised restoration, strength, pride, and unity. They offered simple answers to complex problems and a vision of a Germany reborn. In 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor. Within months, the fragile democracy that had governed Germany for 15 years began to crumble. After the Reichstag fire, civil liberties vanished. Political opponents were arrested and silenced. Germany had become a dictatorship, but one that was technically legal under the new laws passed by Parliament. A chilling fact: Hitler did not seize power entirely on his own. He was enabled by conservative politicians and industrialists who underestimated him. They believed they could control him, that he could be used as a tool to stabilize the nation. In a matter of months, Germany's democracy was gone, replaced by an authoritarian regime built on fear, propaganda, and the ambitions of one man. Control in Nazi Germany was total. The press was silenced, and newspapers were forced to publish only what the regime allowed. Art, music, and literature that did not fit the party's ideology were censored or destroyed. Education was rewritten to teach children loyalty to the state and obedience to the Führer. Young boys and girls joined the Hitler Youth, where loyalty to Hitler replaced loyalty to family. Children were taught to idolize the leader and to view outsiders and enemies with suspicion. The Gestapo spread fear in whispers. Neighbors reported neighbors. One man's vision became a national obsession, consuming the hearts and minds of millions. Society was transformed. Daily life, culture, and personal relationships were controlled. Obedience was rewarded. Dissent was crushed. By the 1930s, the nation was no longer free. It belonged to a single ideology and to a single man. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and within 2 days, Britain and France declared war. World War II had officially begun. The German military unleashed blitzkrieg, lightning war, using speed, coordination, and overwhelming force to crush enemy defenses. Armies advanced rapidly, and entire nations fell under German control before many realized what was happening. Within just 2 years, Hitler had extended his control over much of continental Europe. Yet even as he consolidated power, his ambitions refused to stop. In 1941, Hitler turned eastward, launching the largest military invasion in history, the assault on the Soviet Union, codenamed Operation Barbarossa. It was a brutal gamble. Millions of soldiers and civilians would perish in the frozen steppes and cities caught in the crossfire. The campaign showcased both the efficiency and ruthlessness of Hitler's war machine. The world was entering a conflict of unprecedented scale and devastation, and Hitler's vision of conquest showed no bounds. Behind the front lines, a darker plan unfolded. The systematic extermination of Europe's Jews began, claiming the lives of 6 million men, women, and children. Alongside Jews, Roma, disabled individuals, and political dissidents were also targeted. This was not random killing, it was industrialized death, carried out with chilling precision. Gas chambers and crematoria became tools of genocide. The Holocaust was not chaos, it was organized bureaucracy. A shocking truth: engineers, doctors, and civil servants participated willingly. Evil wore suits, it followed schedules. Millions died not in the heat of battle, but at the hands of a system designed to kill. The Holocaust revealed how ideology, bureaucracy, and obedience could combine to create horror on a massive scale. History remembers it not just as tragedy, but as a warning that organized cruelty can exist in seemingly ordinary institutions, and that human beings are capable of following orders to devastate. By 1945, Germany was collapsing under the weight of defeat. The Allies advanced steadily from the west, liberating towns and cities as they moved. From the east, the Soviet army pressed relentlessly, closing in on Berlin with overwhelming force. In the heart of the city, beneath shattered streets and bombed-out buildings, Adolf Hitler retreated to his bunker. There, cut off from reality, he ranted at imaginary armies and clung to visions of a German empire that no longer existed. The Reich he had promised, the so-called Thousand-Year Reich, had become ashes. As Berlin fell around him, Hitler made the decision that would mark the definitive end of his reign. On April 30th, 1945, he took his own life, ending the life of the man who had brought so much destruction and suffering to Europe. 12 years of dictatorship, war, and terror had brought a nation to ruin. Cities lay in ruins, millions were dead, and a continent struggled to comprehend the scale of the devastation. Hitler's fall marked not only the end of a tyrant, but the collapse of the vision he had forced upon an entire nation. History remembers it as a sobering reminder of how power, ideology, and fanaticism. After the war, the world confronted the full scale of Nazi horror at the Nuremberg trials. Leading figures of the regime were brought to justice, tried for crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide. Yet even amid the pursuit of truth, myths and conspiracy theories began to circulate. Some claimed that Adolf Hitler had escaped, perhaps fleeing to remote locations such as Argentina. Extensive forensic and historical evidence confirms that Hitler died in Berlin on April 30th, 1945. His body was discovered in the Führer bunker, and eyewitness accounts, combined with post-war investigations, leave no doubt. The real mystery is not where he died. It is how millions of people followed him, obeyed him, and participated in a system of destruction. History demands we remember, not just the events, but the lessons of obedience, propaganda, and the consequences of turning a blind eye.
History does not repeat itself, but it echoes. The story of Adolf Hitler is not just the story of a single man. It is a warning about unchecked power, about the dangers of propaganda, and about the consequences of remaining silent in the face of hatred. Hitler was not a supernatural force, he was human, and that is what makes his rise and the horrors he caused so terrifying. Ordinary people, institutions, and governments all played a part in enabling him. The responsibility of memory belongs to all of us. We must remember what happened, not only to honor the victims, but to guard against the forces that made such evil possible. The past is never truly past. It waits in the shadows for those who forget. Walking through the memorials of modern-day Berlin, seeing the names of the murdered, and witnessing the spaces left empty by lives lost, reminds us that remembrance is active.
It requires thought, awareness, and courage. Because if we forget, the echoes of the past can grow into new horrors.